Welcome to the Free Outside Show. This is going to be the show that when I win Cocodona, people are going to look back and be like, oh my gosh, she gave away all the secrets. So I'm just going to get into my approach, how it's backed by some science, and go from there. Welcome to the Free Outside Show. I just got my new driver's license here in Montana, and I got my picture taken. So obviously this weird look that I have, if you're only listening, so for the photo, I had these long sideburns that came and I shaved just my chin, and then they connected to are they called mutton chops, where it goes up and connects to your mustache all the way around. And that's the look I'm gonna have on my driver's license for the next 5 years. So, you gotta have fun with it in a world like this. And Thursday's also therapy day, so I got to talk through some things, and the big talk was yeah, you just got to focus on local and do what you can on the bigger level. And wow, I have such a good look going. If you don't watch on YouTube, you're totally missing out today. All right, here is how I'm probably going to go with a really clickbaity headline, because that's what you're supposed to do these days. So I think this is going to be titled how to train, how to get faster, how to win any race in the world. How to train for any race, including Cocodona. Is that enough keywords? I hope so. All right, let's get into it. Cocodona 250, it's a 250-mile race. This will be the 5th year that I've done it. That means I've already run 1,000 miles on that race course, having done it 4 times. I finished 6th the last 3 years in a row, so I'm hoping to win it this year. Last year I was in pretty good shape, but I showed up and had an Achilles injury within the first 50 miles. And then, as someone who's hard-headed like me does, I ran on it for the next, 200 miles about. And if you haven't listened to those earlier episodes, I do a recap. I think it's still the most listened to episode of the recap of Cocodona 250 last year. Speaking of recaps, it would really help. So I am trying to grow this thing. It's really fun. We've got a couple sponsors on board, but it would mean a lot in getting it out there and really show that people enjoy it if you just find your favorite episode and share it on social media or text it to a friend or something like that. It's weird to ask for these things, but it would just really help out. My favorite episode that I'd probably send to a friend if I were you, the string bean episode, I think is really fun. It explains everything from FKTs to moving fast to hallucinations to coaching. It's a fun one. I thought it was some of my best work, if I say so myself. So here's the recipe that I'm following for Cocodona 250. Last year, actually the last 3 years, I've had varying training. So the first year COVID hit, I was distraught, and Jamil texted me a month before and asked if I wanted to run Cocodona. So we're taking that out for training. I think I got 17th or something with one pacer who just jumped in and no crew. It was a rough year, but I learned a lot. The second year, how I trained is I went and thru hiked the Ozark Highlands Trail. So my background is thru hiking. So I just went back to the drawing board of what has worked in the past to get me as fit as I can be. And it was thru hiking at that point. So I did that, and then, I did some running too. And then the third year, I had a little bit of IT band issues, some hip issues going into it because I basically over raced. I was I didn't start really racing until I was 30 years old. So I need to race a bunch to learn how to do it. So I did a last person standing, and then I did a 48-hour race. I don't know if I won them both. I for sure got at least second or first in both of them. No big deal. But it was too much volume, especially on the roads with where I was at in my training and the base building type thing. And I didn't incorporate some of the strategies I do now so much. So now last year we're going to take out because I was hurt. And last year I did more of what you might call a pyramidal approach. So it's basically stacking the bricks on top of each other of the biggest section at the bottom is your easy running. Your middle section is your moderate running, and your smallest section is your harder running. So it's the pyramid. But now what I usually coach for athletes on and how I train myself is more of a polarized model, which means that you spend still 80% in easy running. And then you might do 10% in moderate running, but then you do, is this math? Let's do 75% easy running, 10% moderate running, and 15% harder, high intensity running. So that's how I train, and that's a lot more how I coach. I think we all evolve as science comes out there and things like that, and just incorporating higher heart rate, higher intensity training. Everything I've looked up, and I wrote an article on this on Substack. If you want to check that out, freeoutside.substack.com. But everything points to that being an ideal method. And so basically what I've been doing even in these higher volume weeks is I take a workout. I write myself a workout. I'm self-coached, and I stick that on Tuesday. So with my schedule, it works best to take Monday off. So I take Monday off, and then I'm as fresh as I'm going to be throughout the week for my high intensity work. And this week it was like 5 by mile. So it's right at the top end of what you would call high intensity, the bottom end of high intensity, because it's for like 5-minute periods at a time. And then I do less in that moderate zone. That might be some sort of tempo run or 45-minute double or something that's just a little bit harder. But everything that I'm going to be doing in the race is going to be in the easy zone. And what can help push that easy pace up is that polarized training on the high end. So that's what I incorporate. That's how I coach a lot of athletes. I just had an athlete blow his mind on how well he did during a 200. So I think it works. I'm pretty big on that. And then the other thing that is really a staple of how I coach and how I train is specification. So like I'm going to have to carry at least 4 liters of water in the first 37 miles. And for 20 of those got to be filled pretty much. So I practice training with that, and especially with the terrain. So I live like 3.5-4 miles from a very steep hill where you can get 1,600 feet of gain in a mile. Now, nothing at Cocodona is going to quite be like that. But what I've been doing is on an easier run per week is you just turn the watch on a face where you can't see any progress happening, and you go completely by feel. And that's when I'm carrying 4 liters of water. I'm carrying everything, all the nutrition I'm going to take, and I'm just getting used to the pack that I'm going to use. And that's a big factor. I mean, probably 60% of Cocodona is running for the winter. So that still means you're hiking for 40% of it. And so I like to incorporate that into my training. And it's not 40% of the miles, it's 40% of the time, because unless you're a professional race walker, you're probably not walking faster than you can run. And let's get into the breakdown now. So basically my schedule to win this Cocodona thing is I'll have a hard workout on Tuesday, Monday's off, hard workout Tuesday, and that's where I have that high intensity. It's usually probably about a 75-minute workout with warm up, cool down, and then the intensity in the middle. And that's standalone day. Let that absorb. Wednesday, I try to get in a lift session that I can usually get everything I want to get in 35 minutes. And this includes some squats, some core work, some ankle mobility, some band stuff, a little bit of kettlebell work, but that's basically it. I can get more into my strength routine. This is an area where I've self-taught and educated myself on a ton of stuff. I feel pretty confident in a lot of strength work. And on Wednesday as well, that's when I do a longer, easier run. And this is where living in Montana is interesting, because we get a lot of storms through the winter. So I kind of have a flex Wednesday, Thursday, Friday based on weather where I can move things. But let's say in the ideal day, I'll do 2 hours of easy running on Wednesday and a gym workout. Thursday, this is kind of that flex day, probably 90 minutes with strides. So that's kind of how I'm balancing that. And like today, I got to go run some hills in the snow with my girlfriend. So fit in. Thursday's kind of can run socially and stuff too. Friday, I've started putting a longer run on Friday, basically because it seems like in post-COVID era, no one does anything on Fridays. So what's the point of even sending emails? So I put my longer run. It's usually like 3 to 5 hours on Friday. Try to get some work in before, try to go at the hottest part of the day, because it's Montana and our hottest part of the day is like 45 degrees. So it's nothing crazy. Saturday, I put in like a 2-hour run, and I try to do this at Run Club. So we have a Run Club here. I'm one of the members, I guess founders too. It's a 501c3. We put in a lot of work. And if you want to donate, Bozeman Run Club on Venmo. But 2 hours there, usually good, so that you're back to socialize a little bit, because I don't run with other people, if you can tell from the schedule, very often. So that's more open, and I can put in a double if I feel like it, which I've done a few times if I feel like I need a little bit higher volume per that week. And then Sunday is open long run. This can be more of a hike. This can be run hike combo where I need to work on things. So that's kind of how I do my weekly schedule, how I progress through things. It's been interesting. I write out a lot of my work or my training plan for myself about 3 weeks or 3 or 4 weeks at a time, and then I can adjust a little bit more on the fly. Why I struggled to have a coach is I have too hard of a time texting and letting someone know that like the plan isn't working and we got to change it. So since it's me talking to me, I just got to put my big boy pants on and tell myself in the mirror that we got to move some things. And that's what happened last week, because I had like a sickness, and then it was that lingering cough and phlegm for a while. So I was just able to flex and move some runs around. And when I could get in a run, I went for quality, didn't go for quantity, went for recovery, as everyone should do when they're sick, because if you're back running good sooner, you'll make more progress than running at a bad level if you try to come back too quickly. And so how I progressed through it is I did a pretty big speed block, but it also had in some longer runs. So it would be like a maybe Tuesday, Friday speed work days, and like Sunday long run. So I really hit that top end of the intensity curve where like 1 minute intervals progress to 2 minutes. And then I do some like lactate clearing work where there'd be a series of intervals, some medium to moderate running, and then another series of intervals, and then a cool down. And so I progressed through that through multiple weeks. And then I hit a little bit of this moderate level where it was like mile plus or 10-minute periods of just let's apply some of that speed to some longer work and get the heart rate used to longer bouts of being at high heart rate. So I did that, and that's when I started upping the long runs a little bit. And because these paces aren't the same as like my sprints, and so this is when the volume built. This is when I went to Black Canyon. I got in some backpacking. So that week I had some really good intensity, and I also had 33 miles of backpacking with like 7,000 feet of gain. So that's a really good way to flex it and move it. And how I've been treating this block too, with the sickness and then having that Achilles injury last year, I haven't gotten too injured other than that. But how I'm treating it is if something feels off on any day, no matter what is scheduled, I'm allowed to flex it to a better day, that workout, and I can cross train, hike, or complete day off. I don't have a problem with being motivated to do too many miles, to go after too much. I have a problem with giving myself the grace to heal up, recover, and be good for the workout, to put in quality over quantity, especially when I'm feeling something. I've used that twice maybe, and one was for sickness. I had to take like 4 off days or something, but that just gives me this open door of like, okay, things feel off, but I don't have to feel like I'm not getting anything in, because on the flip side, there's 10,000 feet of gain in the first 37 miles. So I can get in some harder hiking with a heavier pack. So having that ability to flex and be a little bit smarter with how you're training, I think is really going to make things better for everyone moving forward. The other thing that I think has contributed a lot is stuff is so expensive. I actually partnered with the feed, and they're fueling all this training going into it. I'm making a couple reels and mentioning them here on the podcast, just like now, but it's expensive, especially for how little I make. So partnering with them, because, you know, they sell everything on thefeed.com. You should check them out. But that way I can fuel properly during all this higher volume build too, which I'm currently in. And it also is working to find that perfect calories per hour that my body can handle, and at different intensities. So I don't need to figure out how many calories an hour I can hit in a marathon, because I'm not running a marathon. So it's working on that. And kind of what I've honed in on is I can hit the 90 grams of carbs per hour, which, you know, getting up over into the like 350 calories per hour, which I'll focus on more for Cocodona, because when you're moving at low intensity, you're in fat burning zones enough that you can hit like a more even distribution of calories versus just carbs. So that's how I'm thinking of calories. And so I'm really focusing on fueling. And I also started making my own drink mix. So it has sodium citrate, maltodextrin, sugar, table sugar, just normal sugar. So 2-to-1 ratio there. And then it's got a potassium citrate too. So potassium, sodium, and fructose and glucose, 2-to-1 ratio there. And since now I have my sweat rate number, so like how many milligrams of sodium I sweat out per liter of sweat, now that I have that, I use that to fuel and fill my water, mix my drink into the level that I'll hit those sodium numbers. So it's just math backing into it. I'm trying to replace about 1,100 to 1,200 milligrams of sodium per hour. So this depends on my sweat rate too, but especially in Montana, it's a little tougher. But I'm trying to replace a high amount because I'm sweating out like 1500 plus milligrams sodium per liter. So I'm trying to replace that with that. And that's been a key in my training. It's actually been really nice. I feel like I recover quicker. Another thing about it in this year is I take 2 protein drinks in the morning and the evening, and I put 5 milligrams of creatine in one. I don't know. I think it helps some. It's so hard to do a test on yourself, but I'm experimenting with creatine a little bit. So that's been a helper, I think, on adding more on higher volume and especially keeping some intensity in there with the higher volume. Like on my Tuesdays and my gym days, I also get in a gym day on Sunday. This training works for FKTs. It works for through hiking because you need to hit that top level of intensity, even if you're walking the whole time, because that's what prepares your heart. That's what pushes up that VO2 max, gets your legs able to turn over at a rate that's quicker, and think like downhills when you're pushing on your quads. That higher intensity work will activate your quads. It'll activate your legs all through it, even if you're just walking. So this training has worked for through hiking, FKTs. I've coached many of both of them. And so you can just apply it that way. I also think getting a sodium test, like through Precision Hydration or H-Drop, there's a number of services that can test your sodium. Even if you're through hiking, then you'll know like why I'm getting cramps. It's probably the sodium. Another thing with sodium, we had a sodium episode. Sodium citrate is a lot easier on your system than sodium chloride. I always had drink mixes with sodium citrate, but the salt pills I used to take were sodium chloride. So I'm trying a different salt pill. You can also make salt pills. I was going to try that too, but then it would probably look more like a drug lab in my house than I'm ready for it. But testing out drink mixes, and it's been fun to make my own. So that's kind of how I'm thinking of it. And how I do the build is, let's say I did 50 miles a week through the winter, and a lot of those were at intensity. Then I start adding and stacking more volume on that, lowering the intensity. The base of that, a polarized training method, gets bigger, and the top stays fairly the same as time and intensity. And the middle period stays the same, but that bottom gets bigger and bigger, that specificity of long, slow running with the pack. I also look at my heart rate a lot. I have one of the Coros heart rate armbands that has been really good. I heard a coach actually talk on something about how you shouldn't use heart rate in your training. And I think it's really effective when you're doing a moderate or a hard run, because it gives you the exact heart rate you're at and you know what you want to target by hitting heart rate zones. I think I'm going to do a YouTube video on how to figure out your own heart rate zones. Is actually really easy. You probably even have a hard enough workout for it. And they are zones because you can see on the heart rate graph where it bumps up, where it stabilizes. So it's really interesting. I think it does apply. I think rate of perceived exertion is a lot more beneficial because your heart rate zones will move once you get fatigued, especially in a 200-mile or 100-mile race. So there's 5 zones in a heart rate model. We're going to go with the 5-zone model. And let's just say your zone 2, which is all over social media that people love, that can be, let's say 150 is the top of your zone 2. But when you're tired, you're fatigued, you're hungry, you're on day 3 of Cocodona, that can easily drop to like 142. So it can drop a ton based on like hydration status and all these things, which is why we still use rate of perceived exertion, which is just how are you feeling? How hard does it feel you're going versus what your heart rate says. And that's where that can match up pretty well. But just that fluctuating zones makes it hard. But I do think heart rate zones and being knowledgeable about heart rate is pretty important, because there are different zones of like fat burning zone 1, carb burning zone 2, and then higher intensity from there, like how long can you hold a threshold effort, etc. So that's kind of how I'm thinking of that, and using heart rate in these things is I'll wear it on a long run because I want to see what I averaged and if that heart rate stabilizes. So like yesterday I did a 3-hour run and the heart rate was very flat, and then I pushed the last 2 miles a little bit harder relatively on some hills, I guess. And then you could see it spike up more towards the top into zone 2. So it's just interesting to see that. I don't usually look at it during a long run. I'll look at it during a workout to hit some key heart rate numbers. But during a long run, I just like to look at it after the fact to see how hard I actually went, where my body's at, because you can tell that by where the heart rate zones are, where it's stabilizing. And so that's how I use that. And then the progression through volume, I'm building it around training camps or key weekends. So I think I may jump in a race next weekend, or it's going to be a higher intensity, higher volume weekend. So like a training camp type weekend, which might be 20, 30, 30 for miles for days, miles per day. And then 2 weeks after that, I'm going to do a more Cocodona specific training camp where I'm going to go down there, run some of the course. Of course, I know it as well as anyone, having done it 4 times already. But I just think being down there in that environment, carrying what I'm going to carry, is going to be beneficial. So I'm going to make the time to do that. And that'll put me about a month out from Cocodona. And that's where I'm going to very specifically program my training to where I feel like I need confidence. And then during this time, this is kind of the secret and what I've added to it. I took this a little bit from Will Murray, which is really cool. I interviewed him on here, and I've been working on my own like mantras or things that I'm saying to myself, and I'm practicing them in training. So like on my 20-mile run yesterday, at mile 15 and at mile 18, and whenever it just feels a little hard, I just say some of these things to myself, and they just in my head. I don't have to talk out loud. I only do that for the podcast, but I say these to myself to try them out to see if they feel good. I've changed a couple of them over time, and even throughout the day, I'll just whisper them in my mind, which is weird thought. Do you whisper to yourself? What volume do you talk to yourself with? That's actually something I should do a poll on maybe. So I'll just try them out and use them in normal life and just get really used to them floating through my head. I like to visualize the words going across like a ticker symbol, like in Times Square or something. But that's what I do. And then the way to stay up on fueling on longer runs, because if I'm doing 20 or 30 miles, obviously that's longer than there's going to be between aid stations, is I'll carry a lot, but I'll also swing by my house. I can come up with a route where I run to some mountains, run by my house, run by some other trails or mountains, and can pull it off that way to keep that fueling level high. The key with fueling is, even if you're within the last like hour of your run, if it's a really long run, you should still be fueling. There's so much good science that's come out on like carbs at the end of your run, and that aiding in recovery and bouncing back for the next workout. And so this polarized method, it has worked for people running all sorts of events, even Cocodona. This is kind of getting into the territory where I'm practicing with exactly the gear I'm going to take. I'll probably do a run starting at 5 a.m., which is when the race starts. And I might do a long run experimenting with sodium bicarbonate, which is this thing that is probably responsible for a lot of the faster times and even some of the track world records that are happening lately. And I've used it for some of my longer workouts. It's basically baking soda. It's a base, acid base, high school. And it probably, science is still in the works on some of it, but I believe it neutralizes a lot of the lactate in your legs, formerly called lactic acid, basically. And so you don't feel that burn to the same level that you would before if you're running the same thing. So it seems like it works. It seems science-backed. I partnered with thefeed.com. Check them out. I had a lot so I could get enough of this to train with too, because I think there is a lot of validity in that. And then, I'll start wearing the exact pack, the clothing, johnju.com. They also sponsor the podcast. They just came out with sun shirts, so I'm just got mine in the mail actually. I'm going to start training with that. Go to johnju.com, janji.com, and tell them I sent you at the checkout survey. But the sun shirts are awesome, so highly recommend. They're also going to have a Finish Line Johnji party, so that'll be pretty cool. And then I will do a couple night runs too. I'm very, very confident at night. I mean, I've slept outside like 3+ years of my life, if you add up all the days, maybe more. I think I've thru hiked for my age probably as much as anyone on the planet. It's well over 35,000 miles. So I'm very confident on the night and outdoors portion of it. But if I were coaching an athlete, I would say, is this something we should address, and then decide from there. But I do think there's benefit in relearning, repracticing running with a headlamp. And so I will do some of that, especially on some downhills, because working on that depth perception and picking up things with your eyes just makes it feel more comfortable once you get to race day. So my headlamp I actually got from Garage Grown Gear. They're another sponsor of the podcast. So garagegrowngear.com. I will be taking an Alpha Direct hoodie, and they sell those on there. There's so much good stuff. It's basically small business that maybe have their own website and social media following, but they aggregate, and it's like a marketplace where you can browse and check out a bunch of small businesses, most of them American made. Very cool if you're into that. And so that's kind of the Cocodona training program plan, how I'm doing it. I could walk through what I'm doing exactly each day, how I'm thinking of things, but feel like we got a pretty good overview of mindset, training philosophy, schedule, things like that, strength training even, and putting together pacers. That's something I've done, and the logistics, and then the 2 training camps I think are pretty key. That's how I train. That's a lot of how I coach. That's some stuff about heart rate. That's all our sponsors. I think that's basically everything we got for the show today. So thanks for joining. Thanks for listening about Cocodona training. 250 miles in from today, less than 2 months. So here we go. Thanks for listening, guys. You can support at patreon.com/freeoutside. Every dollar really helps the show. I pay more in services than I get from that, so don't worry. I'm investing myself here too. And just share it with a friend. It really helps out the show. 5-star reviews, ratings, leave a comment on Apple Podcasts. Just really helps. It's something I love researching things and talking about. I might talk about base building, or I did some sleep deprivation research and wrote a Substack on that. Probably talk about that in the coming months, weeks, days, minutes. But till then, stay elite, my friends.